Right now, the most important molecule in the known universe is covering 71% of this planet's surface. You have drunk it, swum in it, breathed the air it creates. You are, by weight, mostly made of it. And almost everything science thought it understood about how matter behaves, water breaks. It freezes wrong. It expands wrong. It conducts heat wrong. It refuses, at nearly every turn, to behave the way physics says it should. And because of every single one of those violations, you are alive. Water should not exist the way it does. A molecule this small, 2 hydrogen atoms bonded to 1 oxygen, should be a gas at room temperature. Its chemical cousins, hydrogen sulfide and hydrogen selenide, follow the rules. They are gases. They behave predictably. Water refuses. It remains liquid across a temperature range so wide and so improbable that scientists still argue, after more than a century of study, about exactly why. Every answer leads to a deeper question. Every explanation opens something stranger beneath it. If you enjoy drifting into the deep ocean and discovering what lies beneath, please consider liking and subscribing. It truly helps more than you know. Are you ready? Let's begin. To understand what water actually is, you have to start with what it does at the atomic level and why that behavior is so unusual that it borders on violation. A water molecule is not symmetric. The 2 hydrogen atoms do not sit on opposite sides of the oxygen atom like a straight line. They sit at an angle 104.5 degrees, which gives the molecule an asymmetric shape. And because oxygen pulls electrons toward itself far more aggressively than hydrogen does, the molecule ends up with a slight negative charge near the oxygen and slight positive charges near the hydrogens. The molecule is, in the language of chemistry, polar. It has a positive end and a negative end. This polarity is the origin of almost everything strange about water. Positive ends attract negative ends. Water molecules are pulled toward each other constantly, forming temporary bonds called hydrogen bonds, not as strong as the bonds holding each molecule together, but persistent, constantly forming and breaking and reforming at a rate of roughly 1 trillion times per second. At any given moment, every water molecule is connected to an average of 3.4 others. This is not how most liquids work. Most small molecules in liquid form slide past each other with minimal attachment. Water molecules cling. The consequences of this clinging are so profound that they reach from the smallest living cell to the largest ocean current on Earth. To trace those consequences properly, you have to begin not at the ocean's surface, but at its deepest history, at the question of where the water came from at all. Earth did not form with water on its surface. The young planet, in the first hundreds of millions of years of its existence, was a ball of rock and metal so hot that any water present would have been vaporized almost immediately. The leading hypothesis for where Earth's oceans came from involves a bombardment in a period in the early solar system when the inner planets were pelted repeatedly by asteroids and comets from the outer solar system, many of which carried ice and water-bearing minerals. Over hundreds of millions of years, Those impacts delivered water to Earth's surface. The water cooled, it condensed, it pooled, and roughly 3.8 billion years ago, possibly earlier, the first oceans formed. This is not a small thing. Earth received its water as a gift from the outer solar system. The same molecular structure that makes water so strange, the angle, the polarity, the hydrogen bonds, is what allowed it to survive as ice in the cold outer reaches of the solar system, to be carried inward, and to become, upon cooling, the liquid that now covers most of this planet. Water arrived here as ice and became an ocean. And in doing so, it created the conditions for everything that followed. Consider what happens when water cools. Most liquids, as they cool, become denser. Their molecules slow down, pack more tightly together, and sink. Water does this too, but only down to 4 degrees Celsius. At that point, something shifts. The hydrogen bonds begin to lock into a crystalline arrangement, forcing molecules apart rather than together. The result is ice, a solid that is less dense than the liquid it came from. Ice floats. This is not normal. This is, in the context of chemistry, deeply strange. Solid forms of most substances sink in their liquid counterparts. If you drop a piece of frozen alcohol into liquid alcohol, it sinks. If you drop iron into molten iron, it sinks. But drop ice into water and it floats every time. Because water, for reasons rooted entirely in the geometry of its hydrogen bonds, decided to do things differently. And because ice floats, life exists. Think about what would happen if it did not. In winter, lakes and rivers and shallow seas cool from the surface downward. If ice were denser than water, if it followed the normal rules, it would sink as it formed. New water would rise to the surface, cool, form more ice, sink again. The freezing process would proceed from the bottom up. Lakes would freeze solid. Rivers would freeze solid. Every body of water exposed to sustained cold would become a block of ice from the floor to the surface, with no liquid remaining for anything living inside it to survive. Most aquatic life would have been eliminated repeatedly over the last several million years of ice ages, and would likely never have developed the complexity it has today. Instead, ice forms at the surface and floats. It creates a lid. That lid insulates the water below it, slowing further freezing, maintaining a liquid layer beneath a layer where fish survive the winter, where bacteria remain active, where entire ecosystems persist through conditions that would otherwise eliminate them entirely. The strange geometry of the water molecule, the angle, the polarity, the hydrogen bonds, is the reason any of that is possible. This is what water does. It solves problems that should not have solutions. And it does not stop there. The ice that forms at the surface of the ocean plays a role in global climate that goes far beyond simple insulation. Sea ice is white. White surfaces reflect sunlight rather than absorbing it, a property called albedo. When the Arctic Ocean is covered in sea ice, it reflects a significant fraction of the solar energy that reaches it back into space, keeping the region cold and helping to maintain the temperature gradient between the poles and the equator that drives global wind patterns and ocean circulation. When sea ice melts, as it is currently doing, at a pace that has no precedent in recorded history, the dark ocean surface beneath it absorbs heat instead of reflecting it, accelerating warming in a feedback loop that compounds itself season after season. The ice was not just insulating the water below it, it was regulating the temperature of the planet. And water's anomalous freezing behavior was the mechanism that kept the ice on top rather than on the bottom, where it could never have performed that function. Every piece of this traces back to the angle between two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom, 104.5 degrees, a number that appears nowhere in the laws of physics as special. A number that simply emerged from the quantum mechanics of electron orbitals and the geometry of covalent bonds. And yet, if that angle were slightly different, if water were a linear molecule, or if its polarity were weaker, ice would sink, the oceans would freeze from the bottom, the albedo feedback loop would not exist in its current form, and the planet's climate history would have been entirely different. Whether life would have emerged at all under those conditions is not a question science can definitively answer. What it can say is that life as it exists emerged under these conditions with this molecule, and that changing the molecule would change everything. The surface of water is a boundary that behaves like no other boundary in nature. Where water meets air, the hydrogen bonds have nothing above them to bond to. The molecules at the surface are pulled inward and sideways, but not upward, creating a layer of tension, a skin, surface tension. This force is weak by most measures, but in the context of the microscopic world, it is immense. A water strider, an insect weighing a fraction of a gram, can walk across the surface of a pond not because it is light, but because the surface tension of water is strong enough, at that scale, to hold it. The insect does not break through. It rests on a membrane that, from its perspective, is solid. For organisms smaller than insects, for the larvae of marine animals, for the eggs of fish, for the bacteria and algae that form the base of ocean food chains, surface tension is a fundamental part of the world. It holds things in place. It creates boundaries. It allows life at the interface between water and air to operate in ways that would be impossible on a surface without tension. The ocean's surface is not empty. It is one of the most biologically active zones on Earth. A thin layer of water at the very top of the ocean, sometimes just a fraction of a millimeter thick, contains concentrations of organic molecules, bacteria, and microorganisms many times higher than in the water just a centimeter below. This layer is called the sea surface microlayer, and it exists because surface tension creates a boundary that organic molecules accumulate against rather than pass through. Molecules rise from below, reach the surface, and are trapped there by the tension of the water skin, concentrating into a biological film that is invisible from above, but teeming with microbial life from within. This microlayer matters for reasons that extend far beyond its own inhabitants. When ocean water evaporates, it carries particles from this surface layer into the atmosphere. Sea spray, the tiny droplets thrown into the air by breaking waves, originates partly from this microlayer and carries its chemistry with it. The organic molecules and bacteria that accumulate at the surface are lofted into the atmosphere. where they can act as cloud condensation nuclei, the particles around which water vapor condenses to form cloud droplets. The ocean is, in a sense, seeding the clouds above it with its own biology. The clouds that form over the ocean and that eventually rain over land carry a chemical signature of the sea surface microlayer. Water does not simply evaporate from the ocean and return as rain. It carries pieces of the ocean's surface chemistry with it, distributing that chemistry across the planet. But surface tension is only part of what water does at the boundary. Water also evaporates, and the way it evaporates is crucial. When water molecules at the surface gain enough energy to escape the pull of their neighbors and become vapor, they carry that energy with them. The water left behind is cooler. This is evaporative cooling, the same mechanism that makes sweat effective, that cools the surface of the ocean, that drives weather systems across continents. The ocean does not simply sit still and accumulate heat. It breathes. It releases water vapor into the atmosphere, taking heat with it, distributing that heat through wind and cloud and rain to places far from the ocean itself. Without evaporation, the tropics would be uninhabitably hot. Without condensation, the interiors of continents would be deserts. Water moves heat around the planet like a planetary circulatory system, and the ocean is its heart. The energy required to evaporate water, to pull a gram of liquid water into vapor, is called the latent heat of vaporization. For water, this value is extraordinarily high, much higher than it should be for a molecule this small. And that high value is what makes the ocean such an effective heat reservoir, and what makes the planet's climate as stable as it is. It takes an enormous amount of energy to change water from liquid to gas, which means that water resists rapid temperature change. The ocean heats slowly. It cools slowly. It acts as a buffer against extremes that would otherwise make much of Earth's surface uninhabitable. Consider the difference between coastal cities and inland ones. San Francisco and Sacramento are roughly 90 miles apart. Sacramento, far from the ocean's moderating influence, regularly sees summer temperatures above 38 degrees Celsius. San Francisco, cooled constantly by the Pacific, rarely exceeds 21. The ocean is not merely nearby. It is actively managing the temperature of the air above it, and the air for hundreds of miles inland. It does this because of the physical properties of water, its heat capacity, its latent heat, its evaporation, properties that follow directly from the hydrogen bond, properties that trace back to the angle at which two hydrogen atoms attached themselves to an oxygen atom more than 4 billion years ago. The water cycle that evaporation drives is the largest movement of matter on Earth's surface. Every year, roughly 502,800 cubic kilometers of water evaporate from Earth's oceans, lakes, rivers, and land surfaces. Most of this, about 434,000 cubic kilometers, evaporates directly from the ocean. That water rises into the atmosphere, is carried by wind, condenses into clouds, and falls as rain and snow. Of the water that falls over land, most eventually finds its way back to the ocean through rivers and groundwater flow. A small fraction is locked in ice sheets and glaciers for thousands of years. And the cycle continues as it has for billions of years, powered entirely by sunlight and water's willingness to evaporate. This cycle is not merely the weather. It is the mechanism by which nutrients move from the ocean to the land, by which the interiors of continents receive the fresh water that makes terrestrial life possible, by which the chemistry of the ocean and the chemistry of the atmosphere are continuously exchanged and equilibrated. Every river that runs to the sea is part of the return path of water that evaporated from that same sea, possibly years or decades earlier, possibly on the other side of the planet. The water in the Amazon River fell as rain over South America, but before that rain, it evaporated from the Atlantic Ocean. The water in the Nile began, in large part, as evaporation from the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean. Oceans and rivers and rain are not separate systems. They are one system, driven by the physics of a molecule that refuses to behave as predicted. Water is the universal solvent. This is not a metaphor. No other liquid dissolves more substances than water does. The polarity that causes surface tension and the anomalous freezing behavior also makes water extraordinarily effective at pulling apart other molecules. When salt sodium chloride is placed in water, the slightly negative oxygen ends of water molecules are attracted to the positively charged sodium ions, and the slightly positive hydrogen ends are attracted to the negatively charged chloride ions. The water molecules surround the salt ions from every direction, gradually pulling them away from each other until the crystal dissolves entirely. The salt does not disappear. It disperses, ion by ion, into solution, each ion wrapped in a shell of water molecules. This happens with thousands of substances: sugars, acids, proteins, DNA. The chemistry of life is almost entirely a chemistry of substances dissolved in water, because water's polarity makes it possible to hold those substances in solution, to carry them from place to place, to bring molecules close enough to react with each other. The interior of every living cell is a water-based solution. The blood in your body is mostly water. The ocean itself is a solution, a vast, slow-mixing solution of salts and minerals and gases and organic compounds, all dissolved in water that is constantly moving, constantly cycling, constantly distributing those substances to the organisms that depend on them. The salinity of the ocean, roughly 35 grams of dissolved salts per kilogram of water, is not random. It is the result of billions of years of water dissolving minerals from rock, carrying them to the sea, and allowing the water itself to evaporate while the salts remained behind. The ocean has been concentrating dissolved material for so long that its salinity has become one of the most stable features of Earth's surface chemistry. It fluctuates slightly over geological time, but within narrow limits. Life in the ocean has adapted to those limits so thoroughly that many marine organisms cannot survive if the salinity changes even slightly. They are calibrated to the chemistry of the ocean, and the chemistry of the ocean is calibrated ultimately to the dissolving power of water. There is a detail here that stops most people when they hear it for the first time. The concentration of salts in the blood of vertebrates, including humans, is roughly 1/3 the concentration of seawater, not equal to seawater. 1/3. This proportion has been stable for hundreds of millions of years across an enormous range of species. The prevailing hypothesis is that early vertebrates evolved in shallow coastal waters, where the salinity was lower than in the open ocean, and that their bodies preserved that internal salinity even as they moved into fresh water and eventually onto land. You are carrying, in your blood, a chemical memory of the ocean your ancestors left behind. The water in your body is trying, still, to match the sea. Water's dissolving power has consequences that extend far beyond biology. It shapes geology. As water moves through rock, percolating down through soil, flowing through underground aquifers, seeping along fractures in bedrock, it dissolves minerals from the rock it passes through. Those minerals are carried downhill, into rivers, and eventually into the ocean. The calcium that marine organisms use to build shells and skeletons comes, ultimately, from calcium dissolved out of continental rock by rainwater and river water over millions of years. The iron that phytoplankton need to grow, and that is often the limiting nutrient in large regions of the ocean, arrives partly via rivers carrying dissolved iron from land, and partly via dust blown off continents that dissolves when it contacts the ocean surface. The chemistry of the ocean is not static. It is continuously being replenished and modified by water's endless dissolution of the rocks it flows through. This has been happening for so long that water has shaped the surface of every continent on Earth. The Grand Canyon was carved by the Colorado River by water dissolving and abrading rock over millions of years. The fjords of Norway were carved by glacial meltwater. The limestone caves of the world's karst regions, some of the most spectacular underground landscapes on Earth, were dissolved out of solid rock by slightly acidic rainwater percolating downward over millions of years. Water, given enough time, dissolves almost everything. The landscape of Earth is a record of water's solvent power applied continuously across geological time, and the ocean floor is no exception. Where seawater contacts the basalt of the ocean crust at hydrothermal vents, along mid-ocean ridges, through the slow percolation of seawater into fractured rock, chemical reactions occur that alter both the seawater and the rock. The ocean is not simply sitting on top of the crust. It is chemically interacting with it, dissolving some minerals, depositing others, in a slow exchange that has been occurring for as long as the ocean has existed. The chemistry of seawater today reflects not only the minerals delivered by rivers, but also the chemical reactions that have occurred at the ocean crust boundary over billions of years. Water and rock are in continuous dialogue. Water asks, and rock answers by dissolving. At the bottom of the ocean, water behaves in ways that have no equivalent anywhere in surface life. Pressure increases by 1 atmosphere, approximately the full weight of the air column above sea level, for every 10 meters of depth. At 1,000 meters, the pressure is 100 times what it is at the surface. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench, roughly 11,000 meters down, the pressure exceeds 1,000 atmospheres. A human body placed there without protection would not simply be crushed. It would be compressed so rapidly and so completely that the process would be effectively instantaneous. Water under this pressure does not compress significantly. It is nearly incompressible, a property that allows it to transmit pressure forces through enormous distances without losing them. This incompressibility is part of what makes high-pressure physics at depth so difficult to study and so surprising when the results come back. Materials that are flexible at the surface become rigid at depth. Fats that are liquid in warm, shallow water become waxy and semi-solid in the cold deep. Biological membranes that function perfectly at 200 meters may fail at 2,000 because the proteins embedded in them lose their shape under compression. And yet, organisms live there. Not just bacteria, not just microbial mats, fish, shrimp, polychaete worms, amphipods, which are small crustaceans, have been found in the Mariana Trench at its deepest point, caught, studied, and discovered to contain in their fatty tissues some of the highest concentrations of man-made chemical pollutants ever recorded in any animal on Earth. Pollutants that were manufactured at the surface, dumped into the ocean decades ago, and transported by water's chemical properties, its ability to dissolve, to carry, to mix all the way to the deepest place on the planet. Even there, the chemistry of water has been at work. The organisms that survive at depth have solved the pressure problem through chemistry that mirrors, in some ways, what water itself does at the molecular level. Many deep-sea fish produce a compound called trimethylamine oxide, TMAO, in their tissues. TMAO counteracts the destabilizing effects of high pressure on proteins, keeping them functional at depths where they would otherwise fail. The concentration of TMAO in a fish's body increases predictably with the depth at which it lives, scaling almost linearly down to the deepest fish ever found. The deeper the fish, the more TMAO in its tissues. And the more TMAO in its tissues, the more it tastes to humans like ammonia. Depth has a flavor. Scientists can estimate how deep a fish lived by how strongly it smells. But pressure is only one of the challenges that deep-sea water poses to life. Temperature is another, and not in the way you might expect. At depth, the ocean is cold. Below roughly 1,000 meters, water temperatures in most of the world's oceans hover between 0 and 4 degrees Celsius, cold enough to slow metabolic processes dramatically, cold enough to make the fats in cell membranes solidify if those membranes were built from the same lipids as surface organisms. Deep-sea organisms have adapted by incorporating different types of fats into their membranes. Fats that remain fluid at low temperatures, that maintain the flexibility and permeability that biological membranes require to function. These are the same fats that make deep-sea fish oily and soft-textured compared to surface fish adaptations to temperature written into the flesh. The cold of the deep ocean is not incidental. It is generated and maintained by a global circulation system that is one of the most important physical processes on Earth, and that depends, at every stage, on the peculiar properties of water. This system is called thermohaline, circulation thermal for temperature, haline for salinity, and it works because both temperature and dissolved salt affect the density of water. Cold water is denser than warm water. Salty water is denser than fresh water. In the North Atlantic, Warm surface water flowing northward from the tropics loses heat to the atmosphere, becoming progressively colder and therefore denser. In the polar regions, sea ice formation removes fresh water from the ocean while leaving salt behind, making the remaining water saltier and denser still. This cold, dense, salty water sinks plunging from the surface to the deep ocean in a process that oceanographers call deep water formation, and flows southward along the ocean floor, spreading through the deep Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific Oceans before eventually upwelling back to the surface thousands of kilometers away and thousands of years later. This is the conveyor belt of the ocean. It is not a metaphor. It is a physical current that moves an estimated 17 million cubic meters of water per second in the North Atlantic alone, roughly 100 times the combined flow of all the rivers on Earth. It carries heat from the tropics toward the poles, moderating the climates of northern Europe so dramatically that London, which sits at the same latitude as the southern coast of Hudson Bay in Canada, has winters that are navigable rather than Arctic. Without thermohaline circulation, northern Europe would be, climatically, more like Siberia. The current is not a convenience. It is the reason those regions are habitable, and it is slowing. The melting of Greenland's ice sheet is adding large volumes of fresh water to the North Atlantic, reducing the salinity and therefore the density of the water that is supposed to sink and drive the circulation. Multiple studies have suggested that the Atlantic thermohaline circulation is at its weakest point in at least 1,000 years, and possibly much longer. If it were to slow significantly, or collapse, an outcome that climate models consider possible within this century under some emission scenarios, the consequences would include rapid cooling across northern Europe, intensification of drought in the Sahel region of Africa, disruption of monsoon patterns across South Asia, and acceleration of sea level rise along the eastern coast of North America. Not because the climate is warming everywhere uniformly, but because a physical system built on water's response to temperature and salinity would have failed, and the redistribution of heat that it provided would have stopped. The ocean's circulation is not passive, it is a mechanism, and the mechanism runs on the physics of water. Water carries sound in ways that air cannot. Sound is a pressure wave, a disturbance that moves through a medium by compressing and expanding it. The speed at which sound travels depends on the density and compressibility of the medium. In air at sea level, sound travels at roughly 343 meters per second. In water, it travels at approximately 1,480 meters per second, more than 4 times faster. And it travels much farther. Sound in air is absorbed quickly by the gas molecules it moves through. Sound in water loses energy far more slowly, and in the right conditions, it can travel for thousands of kilometers. Those conditions exist in a layer of the ocean called the SOFAR channel, the sound fixing and ranging channel, located at a depth of roughly 600 to 900 meters in most parts of the world. At this depth, the competing effects of temperature and pressure on sound speed reach a balance point, creating a kind of acoustic waveguide. Sound that enters the SOFAR channel at the right angle gets trapped there, bending back and forth within the channel rather than escaping upward or downward, losing almost no energy to the surrounding water. The U.S. Navy discovered the SOFAR channel in the 1940s and immediately classified it. They recognized that downed pilots could drop explosive charges into the channel from the ocean's surface, and the resulting sound pulse, traveling for thousands of kilometers, could be detected at listening stations and used to calculate the pilot's position. The ocean had been, without anyone knowing it, a perfect acoustic telegraph system for billions of years before humans learned to use it. Whales learned first. Blue whales, the largest animals that have ever existed on Earth, produce calls that reach 188 decibels, louder than a jet engine, louder than a rocket launch, louder than almost any sound produced by any living thing. These calls have been detected more than 1,600 kilometers from their source. There is evidence that before widespread industrial shipping introduced constant noise into the world's oceans in the 20th century, blue whale calls may have traveled from one side of an entire ocean basin to the other, from the coast of one continent to the coast of another, through the SOFAR channel, using water's acoustic properties to communicate across distances that no other form of animal communication has ever approached. We do not know what they were saying. We know that they were saying it. We know that water made it possible. And we know that we have, over the last century, filled that channel with noise, propeller, hum, sonar, seismic air guns that is loud enough in some frequency ranges to prevent those communications from happening at the distances they once traveled. The ocean's acoustic landscape has changed in less than 100 years in ways that took hundreds of millions of years to develop. Water remembers nothing, but life adapted to water does. The SOFAR channel is not the only acoustic phenomenon that the ocean's physical properties produce. In shallow water continental shelves, coastal seas, and closed bays, sound behaves differently, bouncing between the surface and the seafloor, creating complex patterns of constructive and destructive interference. Marine mammals that live in shallow water have developed echolocation systems tuned to these different acoustic environments. Dolphins in shallow coastal waters use higher frequency clicks, which have shorter wavelengths and provide higher resolution at short distances. Sperm whales, which hunt in deep open ocean, use lower frequencies that travel farther through the SOFAR channel. The biology of their acoustic systems has been shaped by the physics of the water they live in. Evolution has followed the equations. There are sounds in the ocean that still have no confirmed explanation. The bloop, recorded by NOAA hydrophones in 1997, was an extremely powerful, ultra-low frequency sound that was detected by sensors more than 5,000 kilometers apart. Its acoustic profile bore some similarity to biological sounds produced by living creatures, but no known animal has been identified that could produce a sound of that intensity. The current leading hypothesis is that it was the sound of a large icequake, a fracture in an Antarctic glacier. But the question has never been definitively closed. The ocean is large, it is deep, and at its bottom, under pressures that compress even the water itself slightly, sounds propagate that we have never been close enough to hear. Temperature moves through water differently than through almost any other common substance. The specific heat capacity of water, the amount of energy required to raise 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius, is 4.18 joules per gram per degree. This is higher than iron, higher than glass, higher than granite, higher than sand, higher than almost any solid or liquid that covers large areas of Earth's surface. The only common substance with a higher specific heat capacity is ammonia, which is not present on Earth's surface in significant amounts. What this means in practice is that water absorbs and stores enormous quantities of heat without changing temperature rapidly. The ocean has absorbed more than 90% of the excess heat that human industrial activity has added to the Earth system over the last 150 years. Without that absorption, without an ocean capable of holding heat at this scale, the warming of the planet's surface would have proceeded at a pace that makes current projections look modest. The planet would have become, in a span of a few human generations, largely uninhabitable. The ocean is not simply a backdrop against which climate change is happening. The ocean is the reason climate change has proceeded as slowly as it has. Its heat capacity derived directly from the properties of water has been absorbing punishment that would otherwise have been absorbed by the air, by the land, by us. This has not come without consequences. The ocean is warming. It is warming more slowly than the atmosphere would in its absence, but it is warming, and the heat it absorbs does not disappear. It changes circulation patterns. It bleaches coral reefs by raising temperatures beyond what the corals and their symbiotic algae can tolerate. It intensifies hurricanes and typhoons by providing more evaporative energy at the surface. It expands because water, like most liquids, becomes slightly less dense as it warms, occupying more volume, contributing to sea level rise alongside the melting of ice on land. The ocean is paying a debt for us. Water's remarkable heat capacity has bought time. Whether we use that time is a question water cannot answer. But the specific heat capacity is not the only thermal property of water that matters for life. The way water conducts heat, or rather, the way it fails to conduct heat efficiently through the bulk of the ocean, is equally important and equally strange. Water is a poor conductor of heat in its liquid state. Heat moves through still water primarily by conduction, which is slow. If the ocean relied on conduction to move heat from its surface to its depths, it would take thousands of years for surface warming to penetrate even a few hundred meters. The deep ocean would be completely isolated from surface temperature changes on any timescale relevant to living organisms. But the ocean is not still. It is in constant motion, driven by wind, by density differences, by tides, by the Earth's rotation. And it is through this motion convection that heat actually moves through the ocean. Warm surface water is pushed downward by winds and mixing processes. Dense, deep water upwells to replace it. The circulation of the ocean is not only a horizontal phenomenon, but a vertical one, continuously turning the ocean over, bringing deep water to the surface and surface water to the deep. This vertical mixing is critical for life. The deep ocean contains enormous reserves of nutrients, nitrates, phosphates, iron that have accumulated from the slow rain of organic material sinking from above. Surface waters, exposed to sunlight and therefore capable of supporting photosynthesis, are often nutrient poor, stripped of the minerals that phytoplankton need to grow. Where deep, nutrient-rich water upwells to the surface in regions called upwelling zones, driven by the interaction of winds with the Earth's rotation, the result is explosive biological productivity. The coastal upwelling zones off Peru, California, Namibia, and other locations produce some of the most productive fisheries on Earth, not because of any biological property of those regions, but because of physics. Wind-driven upwelling brings deep, cold, nutrient-rich water to a sunlit surface, and phytoplankton bloom in response. The physics of water movement feeds the biology of ocean life, which in turn feeds much of humanity. El Niño, the periodic warming of the eastern tropical Pacific that disrupts weather patterns worldwide, is fundamentally a story about what happens when the normal upwelling pattern in that region is suppressed. In normal years, trade winds push warm surface water westward, allowing cold, nutrient-rich water to upwell along the South American coast. In El Niño years, the trade winds weaken, warm water sloshes back eastward, and upwelling collapses. The fisheries that depend on that upwelling collapse with it. Rainfall patterns across the globe shift as the ocean's heat distribution changes. Droughts develop where they were not expected. Floods occur where they were not anticipated. All because a change in wind patterns altered the vertical mixing of water in one region of the Pacific Ocean. And the ocean's thermal properties, its heat capacity, its sensitivity to density changes, its circulation patterns amplified and distributed that change across the entire planet. Water does not merely respond to weather. At the scale of the ocean, water creates weather. The chemistry of water at the ocean's surface involves not just what dissolves in it, but what moves through it in both directions, what the ocean takes from the atmosphere, and what it returns. The ocean absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, not passively, actively, through both physical dissolution and biological processes. Carbon dioxide dissolves in seawater to form carbonic acid, which then dissociates into bicarbonate and carbonate ions. This chemistry is why seawater is not simply a salt solution, but a buffered solution, one that resists changes in acidity through the carbonate chemistry that water makes possible. The ocean has absorbed roughly 30% of all the carbon dioxide that human activity has emitted since the Industrial Revolution. Without that absorption, atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations would be significantly higher than they are today, and the warming of the climate would have proceeded faster. But this absorption has a cost. As the ocean absorbs more carbon dioxide, its carbonate chemistry shifts. The concentration of carbonate ions, which marine organisms use to build calcium carbonate shells and skeletons, decreases. The ocean becomes more acidic. Not in absolute terms, seawater is still alkaline, but the direction of change is clear, and the pace is faster than anything the ocean has experienced in tens of millions of years. Oysters in the Pacific Northwest have experienced reproductive failures linked to ocean acidification. Pteropods, small swimming mollusks that form a critical link in polar food chains, show signs of shell dissolution in waters that have become only slightly more acidic. Coral reefs, which are built from calcium carbonate and cover an area roughly equal to France, are simultaneously stressed by warming temperatures and weakened by acidification. The ocean is absorbing our carbon and suffering the consequences of doing so. It is, in this sense, taking a wound for us, as it has taken a wound in terms of heat, and the wound is expressed through the chemistry of water. Through the same dissolving power that makes water the universal solvent, the same polarity that drives its behavior, the ocean is becoming chemically different from what it has been for most of the history of complex life. And yet, here is the other side of the same chemistry. The ocean also produces oxygen, not through abiological processes, but through the photosynthesis of phytoplankton, microscopic algae, and cyanobacteria that float in sunlit surface waters, using sunlight and dissolved carbon dioxide to produce organic matter and oxygen. Phytoplankton are responsible for producing roughly half of all the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere, not the rainforests, not the land plants, the ocean. Every second breath you take was produced by organisms too small to see, floating in water, powered by sunlight, using the dissolving properties of water to capture carbon and release oxygen into the atmosphere. This has been happening for more than 2.5 billion years. The Great Oxidation Event, the period in Earth's history when atmospheric oxygen concentrations rose to levels high enough to support complex life, was driven by cyanobacteria in the ancient ocean, using photosynthesis in water to fundamentally change the chemistry of the entire atmosphere. The oxygen you are breathing right now is, in a lineage that extends back billions of years, a product of water's chemistry and the organisms that have evolved to exploit it. Water gave us oxygen, and now we're changing the chemistry of the water that continues to produce it. There is a thought experiment that oceanographers sometimes use when explaining why the ocean matters for life on Earth. Imagine replacing all the water in the ocean with an equal volume of a liquid with normal heat capacity, something like olive oil or liquid iron, substances that absorb heat the way most liquids do. The surface area stays the same. The depth stays the same. Only the substance changes. Within a few decades, the tropics would be uninhabitable. The poles would be far colder than they are now. The temperature difference between equator and poles would be so extreme that weather systems would be violent beyond anything in recorded history. The water cycle evaporation, condensation, rain would be fundamentally disrupted because the properties that drive it are specific to water. Most of the fresh water on Earth, which cycles through the ocean in vapor form, would stop cycling. Rainfall would collapse across continental interiors. Agriculture, in most of its current forms, would become impossible. This is not exaggeration. This is the physics. But extend the thought experiment further. Remove water not just from the ocean, but from the organisms that live there. Remove it from the cells of every living thing on Earth. What remains is not life in a different medium. What remains is not life at all. The chemistry of metabolism, the reactions that extract energy from food, that build proteins, that copy DNA, that power, every muscle contraction and every nerve impulse, all of it requires water as its medium. Water is not the solvent in which biochemistry happens. Water is a participant in biochemistry. It is involved directly in the reactions. Enzymes function only when properly hydrated. DNA maintains its double helix structure only in water. The folding of proteins, the process by which a chain of amino acids becomes a functional molecule, is driven partly by water's tendency to force hydrophobic regions of the protein together, away from the water, creating the compact, functional shapes that proteins require. Remove the water from a cell, and the cell does not simply pause. It collapses. Its chemistry fails. Its structures dissolve or aggregate. The cell is not a container for life in a water solution. The cell is a water structure, a set of relationships organized around and through water, existing only because of what water makes possible. What prevents the collapse of life is a molecule with a bend of 104.5 degrees and a polarity that causes it to cling to itself and to almost everything it touches. A molecule small enough that a single drop of water contains more of them than there are stars in the observable universe. A molecule that freezes wrong, expands wrong, conducts heat wrong, dissolves almost everything, carries sound for thousands of kilometers, and stubbornly refuses to behave the way chemistry says it should. Water is not the backdrop of life. It is not the container in which life happens. Water is the reason life works. Every cell that has ever divided, every protein that has ever folded, every signal that has ever passed between one neuron and another, all of it has happened in water because of water, using water's properties in ways that no other substance could provide. There is one more thing that water does that has no parallel in chemistry, and that science is still, after decades of study, trying to fully understand. Water has memory, not in any mystical sense, in a strictly physical sense, but one that remains, at the molecular scale, genuinely puzzling. Under certain conditions, liquid water appears to maintain structural organization on time scales and at spatial scales that should not be possible given the rapid, random motion of its molecules. The hydrogen bonds that connect water molecules form and break on timescales of picoseconds, trillionths of a second. By all ordinary reasoning, this should mean that liquid water has no persistent structure at all. Every arrangement dissolves almost as soon as it forms, and yet experiments using ultra-fast laser spectroscopy techniques that can resolve molecular motion on timescales of femtoseconds, 1,000 times faster than picoseconds, have revealed that the structural arrangements in liquid water persist longer than simple models predict. Networks of hydrogen bonds cooperate. Fluctuations in one part of the liquid propagate to neighboring molecules. Water does not behave as a simple collection of independent molecules. It behaves as something more collective, something that carries, at least transiently, a kind of spatial memory of its recent arrangements. This does not mean water remembers what was dissolved in it, as some alternative medicine claims have suggested. It does not retain chemical information after a solute is removed. The evidence is clear on that point. But it does mean that the dynamics of liquid water, the way its structure evolves over time, are more complex and more cooperative than was once understood, and this complexity may matter for biology. Proteins embedded in the water of the cell are not simply surrounded by passive solvent. They are surrounded by water that is dynamically interacting with their surfaces, that responds to changes in the protein's shape that may play an active role in the protein's function, rather than merely providing a background medium. Science does not yet know the full extent to which water's complex dynamics participate in biological function. The research is ongoing. The answers are incomplete. What is clear is that the more carefully the question is asked, the more sophisticated water turns out to be. A molecule that appeared, at first glance, almost insultingly simple, 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen, a middle school chemistry fact reveals, under examination, layer after layer of complexity. Every time a new experimental technique is applied to water, something unexpected is found. Every time a model is built that seems to capture its behavior, the model fails somewhere. Water is the most studied substance in the history of chemistry, and it remains, in important ways, not fully understood. This is perhaps the most profound thing about water. It is not exotic. It is not rare. It is not found only in laboratories or in special conditions. It is everywhere. It is what rain is made of. It is what you drink. It is what you are. And after more than a century of intense scientific scrutiny, it continues to surprise. The ocean is the largest gathering of this surprising substance on Earth's surface. It is the original reservoir from which life emerged. It is the thermal regulator that keeps the planet inside the narrow temperature range where complex biology is possible. It is the acoustic medium through which the largest animals that ever lived communicate across ocean basins. It is the chemical warehouse that dissolves, stores, and cycles the minerals and gases that life requires. It is the carbon sink that has slowed the warming of the atmosphere. It is the oxygen factory that has kept the atmosphere breathable for billions of years. It is the source of the rain that falls on every continent. It is the conveyor belt that carries heat from the equator to the poles. It is the boundary across which the atmosphere and the living world exchange gases, heat, and chemistry in a continuous conversation that has no beginning and no planned end. And at its surface, right now, water is evaporating, rising invisibly into the atmosphere, carried by wind across continents, falling as rain on mountains and plains and cities and forests, running back down rivers to the sea. The same water, cycling, as it has for 4 billion years, never created, never destroyed, only moved. There is water in you that has been part of this cycle since before your species existed, before mammals existed, before the dinosaurs. Some of the water you drank today may have been part of an ancient ocean that no longer exists, evaporated, transported, rained down, absorbed into rock, released again by volcanism, condensed again, fallen again, and finally reached you. The water inside you right now has no beginning you could find. It has passed through clouds and rivers and ice sheets and ancient seas. It has been inside dinosaurs and forests and organisms with no names because nothing was alive yet to name them. The ocean did not begin when Earth formed its current shape, and it will not end when we are gone. It will outlast every language, every civilization, every name we have given it. Water does not need us to continue being what it is. It was strange long before we arrived. It will be strange long after we leave. And somewhere in that strangeness, in the 104.5-degree angle, in the hydrogen bonds, in the anomalous freezing and the dissolving and the acoustic waveguide and the latent heat and the cooperative dynamics that science has not yet fully mapped, is the reason you are here. The reason any of this is here. Not as a metaphor, not as poetry, as physics. To truly understand what water is, you cannot look only at the ocean's surface, or at the chemistry of a single cell, or at the behavior of ice. You have to look at the places where water is pushed to its limits, where pressure and temperature and chemical environment combine to produce conditions that seem incompatible with anything recognizable as life. And then you have to reckon with what you find there. The hydrothermal vent fields of the deep ocean are among the most alien environments on Earth, and they are made possible entirely by water. Along the mid-ocean ridge system, the vast underwater mountain chain that winds for more than 65,000 kilometers through every ocean basin on Earth, the longest mountain range on the planet, the tectonic plates of Earth's crust are being pulled apart. As they separate, magma wells up from below, creating new ocean floor. And as this happens, seawater percolates down through cracks and fractures in the newly formed rock, sinking deeper, approaching the heat source below, becoming superheated. What happens to water at that point should not be possible by the physics of surface life. The water descends until it reaches temperatures of 350, 400, sometimes more than 460 degrees Celsius. At the surface, water boils at 100 degrees. At those temperatures, it should be steam. But under the pressure of several kilometers of ocean above it, water cannot boil. It enters a state called supercritical, neither liquid nor gas, but something between, with the density of a liquid and the diffusivity of a gas. Supercritical water is an extraordinarily aggressive solvent. It dissolves metals and minerals that ordinary water cannot touch. It extracts chemistry from the rock around it at a rate that ordinary seawater would take millions of years to achieve. This superheated, mineral-laden water then rises back toward the seafloor. As it approaches the cold ocean bottom and vents through openings in the rock, the hydrothermal vents it meets the cold seawater above. The dissolved minerals precipitate instantly, forming the dramatic black or white columns called smokers. Black smokers form from iron and sulfide minerals that precipitate as black particles when the hot water contacts cold seawater. White smokers form from barium, calcium, and silicon compounds at somewhat lower temperatures. These structures can grow at rates of tens of centimeters per day, forming columns that may reach 60 meters in height, structures built by water chemistry alone in a matter of years. From minerals dissolved from rock kilometers beneath the seafloor. Around these vents, in complete darkness, at pressures 200 to 400 times those at the surface, in water that fluctuates from near boiling at the vent opening to near freezing meters away, life thrives, not merely survives, thrives. Tube worms up to 2 meters long cluster around the vents, their red plumes extending into the hot water. Giant clams and mussels filter vent fluid. Crabs pick their way across the mineral columns. And at the base of all of this, replacing photosynthesis entirely, is chemosynthesis, the process by which bacteria use the chemical energy of hydrogen sulfide and other vent compounds, rather than sunlight, to produce organic matter. These bacteria are the foundation of an entire food web that has never seen sunlight, that cannot see sunlight, that exists because water's dissolving power extracts chemicals from rock, and water's physics brings that chemical energy to the ocean floor. This discovery, made in 1977, when scientists in the submersible Alvin descended to hydrothermal vents in the Galapagos Rift and found, against all expectation, a thriving ecosystem in total darkness, changed the definition of the biosphere. Before that discovery, life was understood to be dependent on sunlight. Every ecosystem traced its energy source back to photosynthesis. After 1977, it became clear that life could exist and flourish in the complete absence of sunlight, powered entirely by chemistry, made possible by water. The implications reached beyond Earth almost immediately. If life could exist in total darkness, sustained only by the chemical energy that water extracts from rock, then the requirement for a planet to be in its star's habitable zone, close enough for liquid water on the surface, but not so close that water boils away, became less absolute. Life might exist in subsurface oceans, far from any star, sustained by hydrothermal chemistry. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn, Europa, Enceladus, Titan, became suddenly interesting in a new way. Europa, covered by a shell of ice, is thought to harbor a liquid ocean beneath that ice, possibly in contact with a rocky seafloor. If the physics of water produces hydrothermal activity in that ocean, as it does on Earth, then the conditions for chemosynthetic life may exist there, under kilometers of ice, in total darkness, warmed by tidal forces rather than sunlight. The search for life beyond Earth is, in large part, a search for water, because water, as far as science currently knows, is the only substance that can do what water does. The deep ocean holds water in states that have no equivalent at the surface, and some of those states were only discovered in the last few decades. Below the hydrothermal vent systems, in the pores of the ocean crust itself, water exists under conditions of extreme pressure and temperature that alter its chemistry in ways that are still being mapped. But one of the most striking discoveries of recent decades has nothing to do with the volcanic rock of mid-ocean ridges. It has to do with the phenomenon on the continental margins, the edges of the continents, where the shallow coastal ocean meets the deep ocean floor. At certain pressures and temperatures, water and methane combine to form a solid compound called methane hydrate, sometimes called fire ice. In a methane hydrate crystal, methane molecules are trapped inside cage structures formed by water molecules, held there by the same hydrogen bonds that make water anomalous in every other context. The structure is stable only under the cold temperatures and high pressures found in marine sediments at depths greater than roughly 300 meters. At the surface, under ordinary temperature and pressure, it dissociates rapidly. The water cages collapse, the methane escapes. The ocean floor is covered with methane hydrates. They exist in enormous quantities. Estimates of the total carbon stored in marine methane hydrates range from 500 to 2,500 billion tons, potentially more than all the conventional fossil fuel reserves on Earth combined. They form a white, icy crust across vast stretches of continental margin sediment. They support communities of specialized organisms, bacteria that consume methane as it seeps from the sediments, which in turn support worms and clams and crabs in a deep-sea ecosystem analogous to, but chemically distinct from, hydrothermal vent communities. And they are sensitive to temperature. As the ocean warms, as the heat absorbed by water's remarkable heat capacity slowly penetrates into the deep ocean, the stability of methane hydrate deposits is threatened. Warming water destabilizes the cage structures, releasing methane. And methane is a greenhouse gas with a warming potential roughly 80 times that of carbon dioxide over a 20-year period. The release of methane from marine hydrates as the ocean warms is one of the potential feedback mechanisms in climate science, a process that could accelerate warming significantly if triggered at large scale. Whether this is a near-term threat or a longer-term one is a matter of active research and debate. The deep ocean warms slowly. Thermohaline circulation moderates the penetration of surface warming to depth. But the hydrates exist. The sensitivity to temperature is real, and the quantity of carbon stored in them is staggering. Water, in forming these structures, has stored an enormous chemical reservoir in the ocean floor. What happens to that reservoir as the ocean warms is a question with implications that extend far beyond oceanography. This is the nature of water in the deep ocean. It does not simply sit there. It reacts with rock, forms compounds with gases, flows in currents driven by its own density, carries sound and chemistry across thousands of kilometers, and maintains ecosystems that have no parallel anywhere on the planet's surface. The deep ocean is not empty space filled with cold water. It is an active, chemically dynamic environment, shaped at every scale by the properties of the molecule that fills it. Consider how life first emerged in water and what that emergence required. The origin of life is one of the most studied and least resolved questions in science. We do not know with certainty how the first self-replicating molecules came into existence. We do not know whether life began in warm, shallow pools, or in hydrothermal vents, or in some other environment entirely. The debates are ongoing, and the evidence is fragmentary, 3.5 to 3.8 billion years old, preserved in rock, often ambiguous. What is not ambiguous is that wherever life began, it began in water. The chemistry that gives rise to life, the formation of amino acids, of nucleotides, of RNA, and eventually DNA, requires water as a solvent and participant. Laboratory experiments attempting to replicate prebiotic chemistry, the chemistry that might have preceded life, consistently require water. The molecules that are candidates for the first self-replicators are stable in water in ways they would not be in other environments. The energy sources that could have powered early chemistry, hydrothermal gradients, UV radiation on shallow surfaces, lightning in moist atmosphere, all intersect with water in ways that make water not just a convenient background, but a participant in the chemistry of life's origin. There is a specific chemical detail that underscores how deeply water is involved in life's chemistry. The bonds between the building blocks of DNA and RNA, the phosphodiester bonds that link nucleotides into chains, are bonds that water can break. In a simple water solution, these bonds are thermodynamically unstable. DNA and RNA should be broken apart by water spontaneously, and in a dilute solution, they do over time. Yet, life has found ways to stabilize these molecules, to protect them within the cell's interior, to replicate them faster than hydrolysis can destroy them. The fundamental molecule of heredity is in constant tension with water, constantly at risk of being broken down by the same solvent that makes its chemistry possible. Life exists at the edge of that tension, maintaining its information-bearing molecules against the dissolving tendency of water through the machinery of cellular biochemistry. This is not a problem that life solved and then moved past. It is a problem that every living cell is solving, continuously, at every moment. Enzymes repair DNA damage. Cellular compartments protect sensitive molecules from water. The membrane that encloses every cell is itself a structure built to manage the relationship between the cell's interior and the water outside it, keeping some substances in, keeping others out, using water's properties to maintain a chemical gradient across its surface. Life is not simply life in water. Life is a continuous negotiation with water, a dynamic relationship that has been refined over billions of years, but never resolved into something stable or simple. The ocean is not where life ended up by accident. The ocean is where life and water co-evolved, each shaping the other, over a period of time so long that it is difficult to think about without losing the scale of it entirely. The ocean floor changes on timescales that make geological processes visible as biology. Sediment accumulates on the ocean floor at rates of a few millimeters to a few centimeters per 1,000 years, in most regions slower in the deep ocean, faster near river mouths and continental margins. This sediment is the archive of Earth's history. Each layer records the chemistry of the water above it at the time it was deposited, the temperature, the salinity, the oxygen content, the types and abundances of organisms that lived in the surface waters and sank to the bottom when they died. Scientists drill into this sediment in the ocean drilling program and its successors. Research ships that have drilled cores from ocean floors across the world and recover records of ocean chemistry that extend back tens of millions of years. The chemistry of the tiny shells of foraminifera microscopic organisms that lived in the surface ocean built their shells from calcium carbonate with an isotopic composition that reflects the temperature and chemistry of the water they lived in, and then sank to the seafloor when they died, preserves a detailed record of how the ocean has changed. From these records, scientists know that the ocean has been both warmer and colder than today. They know when the last major ice ages occurred, how rapidly the ocean warmed between them, what the chemistry of the ocean was during the mass extinctions of the geological past. They know that the last time atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations were as high as they are today was roughly 3 to 5 million years ago, during the Pliocene epoch, when global temperatures were 2 to 3 degrees Celsius higher than today, and sea level was 15 to 25 meters higher. The sediment core tells us what the ocean was and by inference, what Earth was, across a span of time that dwarfs anything in human history. What the sediment cores also reveal is how sensitively the ocean responds to changes in chemistry. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, roughly 56 million years ago, was a period when a massive release of carbon into the atmosphere, possibly from volcanic activity, possibly from methane hydrate destabilization, possibly from other sources, warmed the planet by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius within a geological eye blink of perhaps 20,000 years. The ocean acidified as it absorbed the carbon. A significant fraction of deep-sea foraminifera went extinct. The chemical signatures in the sediment record are dramatic, a sharp change in the carbon isotope record, a dissolution horizon where calcium carbonate shells simply disappeared because the ocean became too acidic to preserve them. Recovery took roughly 200,000 years. The rate of carbon release into the atmosphere during the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum is estimated to have been roughly 0.3 to 1.1 billion tons of carbon per year. Current human emissions are approximately 10 billion tons of carbon per year, an order of magnitude faster than the most dramatic natural carbon release event in the last 66 million years. Water absorbed that ancient carbon. The ocean acidified in response. Recovery was measured in geological time. We are running the same experiment again, faster. There are places in the ocean where water meets something so different from itself that the encounter creates an environment that seems to belong to another planet. The brine pools of the deep Gulf of Mexico and the Red Sea are among the strangest places on Earth. On the ocean floor, in water that is already cold and deep, there are pools of extremely salty water brine, so dense that it sits at the bottom like a liquid within a liquid, with a sharp surface boundary that separates it from the ocean water above. The boundary is real enough that it creates a visible surface. Submersibles have filmed their robotic arms entering it and being stopped by its resistance. It is like watching something dip into mercury. There is a clearly defined interface, a surface that resists entry, a different world on the other side. The brine in these pools is 2 to 8 times saltier than normal seawater. Water's dissolving power created them. As buried salt deposits, remnants of ancient evaporated seas are slowly dissolved by water percolating through the seafloor. The resulting brine oozes to the surface and pools in depressions on the ocean floor. Because it is so much denser than the seawater above, it does not mix. It sits there, cold, anoxic, extraordinarily salty, in stable pools that may be thousands of years old. Nothing should live in them. The salt concentrations are far above what most marine organisms can tolerate. The near total absence of oxygen would kill most animals within minutes. And yet, at the edges of the brine pools, where normal seawater and brine mix in a gradient, life has established itself. Mats of bacteria coat the brine surface. Specialized worms, polychaetes, adapted to hypersaline conditions can be found at the margins. Mussels colonize the brine-seawater interface. The mussels host chemosynthetic bacteria in their gills, bacteria that metabolize the methane and sulfides that seep from the pool, converting chemical energy into biological energy in the same way that vent organisms do. Here, At the edge of conditions that life should not be able to tolerate, water's chemistry has created an environment so strange that it forced life to find new solutions, and life found them. Every time water creates an extreme environment, life finds a way to exploit it. Not because life is aggressive or determined in any intentional sense, because water's chemistry provides energy, and where there is energy, self-replicating chemistry eventually exploits it. This is, in some ways, the most important thing about water. It does not merely permit life. It generates opportunities for life everywhere it goes, in every state it adopts, at every temperature and pressure where it can exist. Water under the ice of Antarctica supports microbial ecosystems. Water in the pores of volcanic rock hosts communities of bacteria that have probably been isolated from the surface ocean for millions of years. Water in deep ocean sediments, under pressures that would destroy most organisms, supports microbial communities so sparse and so metabolically slow that individual cells may divide only once every 1,000 years, living on geological time, sustained by the chemistry that water makes possible even in the most extreme conditions. Life is not a thin film on the surface of a world that is otherwise hostile to it. Life is distributed through the ocean to depths that are still being mapped, through sediments that extend kilometers below the sea floor, in volumes that are genuinely difficult to estimate, but that may represent a significant fraction of all the biomass on Earth. Water carries it, sustains it, connects it, and creates the chemical conditions that allow it to persist in places that, by the standards of surface life, should be completely uninhabitable. The ocean is not the backdrop. It is the substrate, and water is the reason. The ocean breathes, not metaphorically, physically. The ocean and the atmosphere exchange gases continuously, driven by differences in concentration between dissolved gas in the water and gas in the air above it. When a gas is more concentrated in the atmosphere than in the surface ocean, it dissolves into the water. When it is more concentrated in the ocean, it escapes into the air. This exchange occurs across every square meter of ocean surface at every moment, driven by wind and wave action that constantly renew the water at the surface, preventing the thin layer of already equilibrated water from blocking further gas transfer. Oxygen, produced by phytoplankton in the surface ocean, escapes to the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, produced in excess by human activity, dissolves from the atmosphere into the ocean. Nitrogen, which makes up 78% of the atmosphere, dissolves and is used by specialized bacteria that fix it into forms usable by other organisms. Sulfur compounds cycle between ocean and atmosphere, with marine bacteria producing dimethyl sulfide, a compound that smells like the sea which, when oxidized in the atmosphere, produces sulfate aerosols that serve as cloud condensation nuclei, influencing cloud formation and therefore climate. The smell of the ocean is not incidental. It is a trace of the atmospheric chemistry the ocean is producing. This gas exchange is not static. It responds to temperature. Gases dissolve more readily in cold water than in warm water, which is why the cold high-latitude oceans absorb more carbon dioxide per unit area than the warm tropical oceans. It responds to biology. When phytoplankton bloom in spring, they consume carbon dioxide faster then the atmosphere can replenish it, drawing the surface water undersaturated in carbon dioxide and accelerating uptake from the air. It responds to circulation when deep water upwells, bringing carbon dioxide from the depths to the surface. That carbon is released to the atmosphere, temporarily increasing local carbon dioxide concentrations. The ocean is not simply a passive sink for atmospheric gases. It is an active participant in the chemistry of the atmosphere, continuously exchanging, absorbing, and releasing gases in response to temperature, biology, and circulation. The atmosphere exists in the state it does, with the oxygen levels, the carbon dioxide levels, the nitrogen levels, the trace gas compositions that it has, partly because of what the ocean does to it, continuously across billions of years. Remove the ocean's gas exchange, and the atmosphere changes. Oxygen levels would decline as phytoplankton stop producing it. Carbon dioxide would accumulate as the ocean stops absorbing it. The planet's chemistry would shift. The conditions that support complex life would erode. The ocean is the lung of the planet, and water is what makes lungs possible. When you look at the ocean at night, if you are somewhere far enough from city lights that the sky above you is dark, the water below you and the sky above you are continuous, the same darkness, the same depth. Stars in the deep ocean are both places where light fails and distance becomes difficult to think about in human terms. But there is a difference. Space is, by the standards of chemistry, almost completely empty. The density of matter in interstellar space is roughly 1 atom per cubic centimeter, effectively a vacuum. The ocean, by contrast, is filled. Every cubic centimeter of seawater contains roughly 3.3 times 10 to the power of 22 molecules of water, 33 billion trillion molecules, plus the dissolved salts, plus the organic compounds, plus the microorganisms, plus the gases. The ocean is not empty darkness. It is full darkness, a darkness crowded with chemistry and life, and the physical processes that the properties of water make possible. The last great unexplored territory on Earth is not above us, it is below us. It is below the surface of an ocean that covers more than 2/3 of this planet, that reaches depths that no human technology has fully mapped, that harbors ecosystems that have never been observed, that contains chemistry that is still being discovered, that drives the physical processes that make the surface of the planet where we live inhabitable. And all of it, every current, every creature, every chemical reaction, every acoustic signal, every sediment layer recording the history of the planet, all of it is made possible by a molecule small enough to be invisible, abundant enough to fill the deepest trenches and the highest clouds, and strange enough that after a century of study, scientists are still finding new things it does. The ocean is the ocean because water is what it is, not because water is simple, not because water follows the rules, but because water, in breaking the rules, created a world where something as complicated and improbable as life could emerge, persist, and eventually, billions of years later, sit quietly in the dark and wonder about the substance it came from. That strangeness is the reason we are here, as physics, as history, As the ocean floor rising slowly beneath kilometers of water that was, once, ice in the outer solar system, and will be, eventually, something we cannot yet name. Water was here before us. It will be here after us. It does not know we exist. It does not need to. It is simply what it is, and what it is enough. If this journey moved something in you, consider subscribing to Sleep on Deep. Every week, we descend a little further. The ocean is waiting. There is a specific kind of silence that belongs to the deep ocean, and it is different from any silence that exists on land. On land, silence is the absence of sound. Even in the quietest forests, there are insects, wind, the occasional movement of an animal, the low hum of distant civilization. True silence is rare and temporary, a brief gap between sounds, not a condition that persists. The human brain, accustomed to a world of sound, finds deep silence too uncomfortable. It manufactures sensations to fill it. In the deep ocean, there is no such silence. The ocean is never quiet, but its sounds are not the sounds of surface life. Water carries vibrations across thousands of kilometers through the Sofar Channel. Shrimp colonies create a constant crackling noise, a biological background that early submarine crews sometimes confused for enemy sonar. Earthquakes and volcanic eruptions on the seafloor generate low-frequency rumbles that propagate through the water for days. Ice grinding against rock in polar regions produces sounds that travel to equatorial receivers. The deep ocean is acoustically rich in ways that surface life cannot perceive because the frequencies involved are below or above what the human ear can detect, and the distances involved make no intuitive sense. Oceanographers have placed long-term acoustic recorders on the seafloor and left them for months or years. When retrieved and analyzed, these recorders reveal a soundscape of extraordinary complexity, seasonal patterns as different species migrate and breed, interannual patterns linked to climate cycles, long-term trends as shipping, traffic, and other anthropogenic noise sources increase. The acoustic environment of the deep ocean is a kind of slow music playing at frequencies and timescales that no human ear will ever hear in real time. It must be compressed, sped up, translated into audible frequencies before it becomes perceptible to us. Even then, what we hear is a translation, not the thing itself. Water is the medium in which this music plays. Its density, its compressibility, its temperature depth profile, all of these determine what sounds are produced, how far they travel, and what creatures have evolved to use them. Change the medium, and the music disappears. There is no equivalent acoustic channel in air. There is no equivalent capacity for long-distance communication through any gas. The Sofar Channel is unique to water, and the biology that has evolved to exploit it is unique to the ocean. This matters because the ocean is changing acoustically as well as thermally and chemically. The average background noise level in the ocean has increased significantly since the mid-20th century, primarily due to commercial shipping. The number of large cargo ships on the world's oceans has grown by roughly 4 times since 1950, and each ship generates continuous broadband noise that propagates through the ocean for hundreds of kilometers. In some frequency bands, in some regions, the ocean is now tens of decibels louder than it was 50 years ago. Tens of decibels is not a small number. In acoustic terms, it represents a difference in intensity of 10 to 100 times. The background against which marine mammals are trying to communicate has become dramatically noisier within a single biological generation, within the lifetime of individual whales that may live for 80 or 90 years. We know that this is having effects. We do not fully know the extent of them. Studies have shown that whales change the frequency and intensity of their calls in noisier environments, a response analogous to a person raising their voice in a loud room. Porpoises exposed to naval sonar exhibit stress responses and have been found stranded on beaches in association with naval exercises. The behavioral ecology of species that rely on long-distance acoustic communication species whose biology was shaped by an ocean that was, for hundreds of millions of years, much quieter than it is today, is being disrupted by a change that occurred over decades. Water carries sound, and water carries the consequences of what we put into it. The transparency of water is another property that deserves its own attention, because it is not at all what it appears to be. Water looks transparent. You can see through a glass of it. You can see through the surface of a clear lake or a shallow tropical sea. This transparency seems obvious and unremarkable. But water is not transparent to all wavelengths of light equally. It is transparent to visible light, the narrow band of electromagnetic radiation between roughly 400 and 700 nanometers that the human eye evolved to detect. It is much less transparent to infrared radiation, the longer wavelength radiation that carries heat. And it is nearly opaque to ultraviolet radiation at the wavelengths most damaging to DNA. This selective transparency is not incidental. It is, for life in the ocean, critically important. Infrared radiation, the wavelength at which Earth radiates heat back toward space, is absorbed by water very efficiently. When sunlight hits the ocean's surface, the visible wavelengths penetrate and are absorbed at depth, spreading their energy through the upper water column. But the infrared component is absorbed almost immediately at the surface, warming the surface water directly. This differential absorption sets up the thermal stratification of the ocean warm surface, cold, deep, that drives so much of the ocean's biology and physics. Ultraviolet radiation, which can damage DNA and disrupt photosynthesis, is absorbed in the upper few meters of the ocean, largely by dissolved organic matter and by sunscreen-like compounds produced by phytoplankton. The organisms that live slightly below the surface, protected from UV by a few meters of water, can photosynthesize using visible light while being shielded from the most damaging wavelengths. Life near the ocean's surface has adapted to live in exactly the light environment that water's selective absorption creates. And visible light itself, the light that penetrates deepest and sustains photosynthesis, follows a predictable pattern of absorption in the ocean. Red light is absorbed first, within the first 10 to 20 meters. Orange next. Yellow next. Green penetrates somewhat deeper. Blue penetrates deepest in clear open ocean water. Blue light can reach depths of 200 meters or more. This is why the deep ocean is blue. It is not a reflection of the sky. It is the color of light that water has not yet absorbed. This has shaped the biology of ocean organisms at a fundamental level. Phytoplankton have evolved pigments tuned to absorb the wavelengths of light that penetrate to the depths where they live, predominantly blue and green light in the open ocean. Fish and other organisms in the deeper ocean often have visual systems sensitive primarily to blue light, because that is what remains at depth. The eyes of deep-sea fish are extraordinary. Some have evolved multiple layers of visual pigments to extract maximum sensitivity from the faint blue light that reaches them. Others have evolved tubular eyes that point upward, maximizing the solid angle of sky they can see while minimizing the cross-section visible to predators below. The optics of water have written themselves into the anatomy of every animal that has ever tried to see in the ocean. In the abyssal zone below roughly 4,000 meters, where no sunlight whatsoever penetrates, some fish have no functioning eyes at all, or only vestigial remnants of eyes. Others have enormously enlarged eyes to capture the faint bioluminescent flashes of organisms around them. The visual ecology of the deep ocean is entirely organized around two sources of light: the residue of sunlight that barely reaches the mesopelagic zone above, and the bioluminescence that organisms themselves produce. No other light source exists. No other has ever existed in the billions of years of that darkness. Water's selective transparency determined which wavelengths of light reached which depths. Biology adapted to those wavelengths. And then, at the point where even those wavelengths failed, biology invented its own light, bioluminescence, to operate in the complete absence of the sun. The ocean made darkness, and then life learned to glow. There is a question that scientists ask about water that has no clean answer, and that is worth sitting with before the end of this journey. Is water unique in its capacity to support life? Or are there other solvents, other liquids that could, in principle, serve the same function on another world with a different chemistry? The candidates are few. Ammonia is sometimes discussed because, like water, it has a high latent heat and a strong capacity to dissolve polar substances. But it is liquid only at temperatures between -78 and -33 degrees Celsius, and the chemistry of life as we know it does not function at those temperatures. Hydrogen fluoride has some properties resembling water, but is violently reactive with most organic compounds. Sulfuric acid present in the atmosphere of Venus in large quantities is a powerful solvent, but destroys the complex organic molecules that form the basis of biochemistry. There may be life on other worlds using solvents other than water. Science cannot rule this out. The biochemistry of such life would have to be radically different from anything we know, built on different molecular scaffolds, using different energy sources, operating at different temperatures. We would probably not recognize it immediately as life if we encountered it. But on this world, in this ocean, the solvent is water. And the life that exists here, including us, is built so deeply around water's properties that it is genuinely difficult to imagine what a version of this life would look like in any other medium. The hydrogen bond that makes water unusual is the same bond that holds the strands of DNA together. The polarity that makes water a universal solvent is what drives proteins to fold into functional shapes. The high heat capacity that makes the ocean a thermal buffer is the same property that keeps the temperature of a living cell stable enough for biochemistry to proceed. The anomalous freezing behavior that keeps lakes from freezing solid is the same behavior that prevents ice crystals from forming inside cells during mild freezes, because water in biological systems behaves differently from water in bulk, influenced by the presence of dissolved proteins and salts that shift the freezing point downward. Water and life are not separate systems that happen to have found each other. They have co-evolved for billions of years in the ocean. Water has shaped the chemistry of life. Life has shaped the chemistry of water, has changed its oxygen content, its carbon dioxide content, its pH, its mineral balance over geological time. They are entangled at a level that makes it difficult to describe one without describing the other. The ocean is where that entanglement began. It is where it continues, in every current and every creature and every chemical reaction occurring right now in depths we have never seen. And it is where it will end, eventually, when the sun expands and the oceans evaporate and the water that was delivered to this planet by ancient asteroids returns to space. Until then, the ocean remains. Water remains, moving through its cycle, carrying heat and sound and chemistry and life, as strange and as obstinate as it has always been. The most ordinary thing in the world, the most extraordinary, the same molecule. There is one more scale at which water operates that is easy to overlook because it is so intimate, the scale of the individual human body. You are, depending on your age and body composition, between 55 and 75% water by weight. An infant is closer to 78%. A person who has aged significantly is closer to 50. As you age, you dry out incrementally, imperceptibly, over decades. The water content of the body is not a constant. It is a variable that the body regulates continuously at considerable metabolic cost because the tolerance for deviation is narrow. A loss of 2% of body water produces measurable impairment of cognitive function. A loss of 10% is life-threatening. A loss of 15 to 25% is fatal. You are not primarily carbon, though carbon provides the structural backbone of the molecules you are made from. You are not primarily nitrogen or phosphorus or calcium, though all of these are essential. You are primarily water. And your body knows this with an urgency that overrides almost everything else. Thirst is one of the most ancient and powerful signals in vertebrate biology, a signal shaped by hundreds of millions of years of evolution in an environment where finding water was often the difference between life and death. The sensation of thirst is not a suggestion. It is a physiological alarm, produced by receptors in the brain that detect even small decreases in blood osmolarity, responding with a cascade of hormonal and neural signals that redirect attention toward finding water. The body does not simply store water. It manages it dynamically, continuously losing it through respiration, perspiration, and excretion, and replenishing it through drinking and through the metabolic breakdown of food. Every gram of carbohydrate metabolized releases approximately 0.6 grams of water as a byproduct. Every gram of fat releases approximately 1.1 grams. Desert animals, camels, kangaroo rats, some birds have pushed this metabolic water production to its limits, evolving the ability to generate and conserve water from food with extraordinary efficiency. They are living demonstrations of water's centrality to animal physiology. In the driest environments on Earth, where liquid water may be absent for months, life has found ways to manufacture its own water from the chemistry of food. But this metabolic water is itself a product of the ocean's chemistry, filtered through billions of years of evolution. The glucose that is metabolized to produce it was synthesized by a plant using water and carbon dioxide in photosynthesis. The fat that burns to produce it was assembled in a cell whose interior was a water-based solution. Water produces water through the long chain of biological reactions that connects sunlight to food, to metabolism, to the moisture in your breath. You are breathing water right now, not as liquid, but as vapor exhaled with every breath, as moisture that condenses in cold air into the small clouds you can see in winter, dispersed invisibly in warm air, carried eventually by wind to the ocean or to rain. Over the course of a day, a resting human exhales roughly 300 to 400 milliliters of water in breath vapor. Over a lifetime, that is thousands of liters water that entered your body as drinking water and food, was used in the chemistry of your cells and returned to the atmosphere as breath. Water that is now part of the cycle again, moving toward the ocean or toward rain or toward the tissues of some other organism somewhere else in the world. You are a temporary form that water is passing through. The water that makes you will outlast you by a time that is impossible to think about in personal terms. It will be in other bodies, other oceans, other clouds, long after everything that is currently you has dissolved back into the soil and the sea. The ocean knows this, not with consciousness, with chemistry. It has been cycling water through living things since the first cells emerged in it, billions of years ago. It will continue cycling water through living things until the conditions that make life possible no longer exist on this planet. And then the water will remain vapor in a thickening atmosphere, ice on a cooling surface, or dispersed into space as the sun swells into a red giant and sweeps the inner solar system clean. Water was here before us. It will be here after us. And in between, briefly, it has been us. The ocean is waiting.